All right, we are live, and it's Dr. Rob Kiltz, CMI Fertility, with Casey DiPaola, and thank you so much for being here. And you are coming from the New York Surrogacy
Center.
Center.
Yes, and
Yeah,
thank you for having me.
yeah, no, it's really a pleasure. And we're here going to share sort of what is surrogacy about, how do people know they even need it, what type of services are you offering, and we have lots of thoughts and ideas. But we're also going to offer a Q&A session for anyone sharing with us today. So maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself and your surrogacy center.
Sure, absolutely. So Casey DiPaola, I am one of the co-founders of New York Surrogacy Center, along with Joe Williams. He's my partner. I'm also an attorney. I'm licensed in New York, New Jersey, and Vermont. New York Surrogacy Center is located in Albany, New York. We are a licensed surrogacy matching program. We're licensed by the New York State Department of Health. We work with intended parents, primarily in New York and surrounding states, but really all over the country. And we also work with surrogates, probably a third of them in New York State and mostly along the East Coast.
And so tell us a little about what is surrogacy, who would need it and why they need it. And, again, whole intention here is that we can both sort of work off each other on things that maybe one might not be thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So surrogacy, just kind of to start at the basics, is when there's a woman, the surrogate, who carries a pregnancy for intended parents, and she's not going to be genetically related to the baby that she's carrying. So that might be the egg and sperm from the intended parents, or donor egg, donor sperm, donor embryos. And the reasons you might use surrogacy are if, perhaps you're a gay couple and so you can't carry a pregnancy yourself, or if you have some type of medical issue where you can't carry a pregnancy.
Do you think something like just failed implantation is a reason, which is something that I've always thought that we should probably have more availability, because you're not getting pregnant. So many women look towards donor eggs, sometimes donor sperm or donor embryos, but the idea of using a carrier to help because you failed and we don't know why. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, we defer to the medical professionals on when it's time to switch over to surrogacy, but we're seeing more and more of that, where people are coming to us a little bit earlier on in the process, before going through, endless transfers that are unsuccessful or repeated miscarriages.
And so why would let's talk about why would someone want to be a surrogate or a gestational carrier? Maybe you could say, what's the difference between a surrogate and a gestational carrier?
Yeah, so the terms get used sometimes interchangeably, and New York statute actually uses the term person acting as surrogate. But typically, the bigger difference is when we're talking about gestational surrogacy versus traditional or genetic surrogacy. That's really the big difference. And so gestational surrogacy is when the surrogate does not have a genetic connection, meaning that it's not her egg being used. And genetic or traditional surrogacy would be when her egg is used. In a lot of states, genetic or traditional surrogacy is still not legal, or the contracts aren't legally enforceable, or it takes a little more on the legal side to recognize parentage under those circumstances. So our agency, we only work with gestational surrogates.
So someone who's going to carry a baby, not be related, it's not her egg, it's either a donor egg, a donor sperm, or the intended parent's egg and sperm embryo that they're going to carry, and she's going to carry the pregnancy, deliver it, and then the baby is going to be passed off to the intended parents or the genetically related parents. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so is it now, New York recently changed their laws about surrogacy. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So up until 2021, compensated surrogacy was actually illegal in New York. And even uncompensated surrogacy, while not illegal, there was no real clear path to parentage. You had to do an adoption afterwards most of the time. So this was a big change in New York law. And now we have a very comprehensive law, I would say, in New York. It's very specific about what's required, but if you follow all of the steps appropriately in New York, you have very secure parentage of your child born via surrogacy, including having a pre-birth order of parentage, which declares the intended parents to be the sole parents of the child, specifically says that the surrogate is not a parent, and also specifies that any donors are not parents of the child that's born.
So what's the process for individual or couple, whether they're gay, lesbian, or whatever they are, in order to find a surrogate?
Yeah, so what we do is we will work with people early on in their process with surrogacy. We'll have them sign up with us as their agency. We'll talk to them about what they're looking for from their surrogacy journey in terms of, surrogate preferences, which might be things like age, location, her marital status, and then what they're hoping for out of their relationship with her and what type of a feel they want for their surrogacy journey. And then we look for a woman who would be the right fit for them, go through, exchanging profiles between them, setting up a meeting where they'll meet with each other. And then kind of once they agree to match, we guide them through the rest of the surrogacy process.
Unlike anonymous donation of eggs, sperm, or embryos, there is no anonymous surrogacy. Someone carrying a baby and then you have no idea who they were, suddenly you have a baby. Tell us a little bit about the relationships that develop through this process.
Yeah, so every journey is a little bit different, but generally it's a very close relationship. So, and we encourage that at our agency. So they meet before they officially match, over Zoom typically, but then we encourage them to meet in person soon after. A lot of times the medical screening is an opportunity to meet in person. And if not, we encourage them to get together otherwise and to be in contact, hopefully weekly, whether it's just text messages or FaceTime or something like that. Because it's a really intimate process that you're undertaking together. It's very different than donation. And so there will be bumps along the way. And we really believe that if you've established a solid relationship between the surrogates and the intended parents, all of those bumps will be easier to, overcome along the way.
What do you think is the primary trait that someone's looking for in this relationship they're finding? Is it can you tell us a little bit about that, whether they've had a child or not, age, size, or other things that might go along with their choice?
Yeah, so, I think that one of the most important things is actually the reliability of the surrogate. So, somebody who can be trusted to provide complete and honest answers, who can follow through on all of the tasks that she needs to do, reliably report on how things are going. So, I think, that's an intangible. You can't find that on paper, but that's so important. And that's part of what we're doing as we're going through the screening process with surrogates before we match them, is making sure that they are able to follow through on things, be responsive. And then beyond that, we do have intended parents who want a certain BMI, for example, or an age limit. We work with surrogates that qualify within the American Society for Reproductive Medicine criteria. So that's age 21 to 45, up to a 35 BMI, at least one uncomplicated prior pregnancy that was full term, so 37 weeks. But I'd like to hear your take on that too, kind of what you feel about those criteria.
Well, I think they're reasonably okay. BMI is always something that I'm a lot more generous with. And, the challenge with all of our data is that BMI may have a lower success rate in a cohort, but individuals may do better. And so you have to look at each individual potential surrogate and know a little bit about their history. Many of them may have a higher BMI than that, have had plenty of successful pregnancies, and have been a surrogate before and still would be a good candidate. So we're open to that. We see a lot that have done multiple pregnancies, and I don't have a limit on that. I don't know if you guys talk about that very much. I just saw one recently. She's doing her fourth cycle, and she has transferred 2 embryos each time to be successful to have one baby. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about the the decision making and whether to put one or two embryos in. I mean, in general, we recommend one embryo, but in some cases, we find that it's two embryos that get the baby.
Yeah. So, we don't have a hard and fast rule on this, but we like to just make sure that everybody's considering all of the possibilities if they go with a double embryo transfer. So, first of all, that when people are just trying to have a singleton, making sure that they know that it is also very possible that they could end up with twins, and they have to be ready for that. And that a twin pregnancy is going to be high risk, so it's going to mean more appointments, more monitoring of that pregnancy, a higher risk of preterm delivery, complications, bed rest, all of that kind of stuff. And also, one of the added complexities is that if you do have your babies early and they're in the NICU, a lot of times the surrogate doesn't live in the same town. So now you're also living in a hotel, potentially in a different state, and all of those added complexities. So we don't tell people that it's off limits, but we just make sure that they've thought through all of that. And that's on both sides. For the surrogate, we want to make sure that she's thought through, what if she ends up on long-term bed rest? What does that look like for her job, her family, her own kids? And then just make sure that everyone's going into that fully educated. And we definitely tell them all to talk to you too, talk to the clinic, make sure that you understand from the medical side too.
And let's see, Hannah Rossetier has a question. Her sister has offered to be a surrogate for my husband and I. We have been trying for a baby for 5 very long years, but no luck. I have PCOS and thyroid issues. What's the process like if you already have a surrogate? And does age really matter with this? She's 35.
So 35 is a great age. That's my opinion on that. And the answer is that if you have someone like a sister who's willing to carry for you, you can use an agency, but you certainly don't have to. So lots of people who have a close friend or a family member that they've already found will kind of bypass the agency process and work directly with an attorney to help guide them through the surrogacy process. Others who are going through it for the first time still feel that the support of an agency would be helpful. And so we actually do offer what we consider kind of an agency assisted journey, where we cut the agency fee in half, but still provide everything except the matching services, basically, because you already have your own surrogate.
And I imagine just the legal process and finding someone that has a lot of experience is very important in this.
Yeah, absolutely. This is not an area where you want to hire a general family law attorney. It's very specialized. In terms of looking for an attorney, 2 great resources are the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys. They have an entire listing of attorneys all over the country who have been very carefully vetted in order to be members of that. And then also, if you're in New York specifically, there's New York Attorneys for Adoption and Family Formation that has another listing of all of their member attorneys.
So, what are your thoughts of a relative carrying a baby? Do you think those are some special things that people need to look for some good resources how to handle that and some counseling?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be a beautiful process. In my, wearing my attorney hat outside of the agency context, I've been involved in many, many, many of those journeys, and there've been a lot of beautiful journeys. But I think there are special elements that you have to think about, which is that you're going to be in each other's day-to-day life after this baby's born. And so you want to make sure that everybody's really talked about expectations so that you don't sour your own relationship with a sibling or close friend or family member. And also make sure that you're on the same page about, what's going to be said to the child at what point, what role is the aunt and surrogate going to play, later on. And so a qualified mental health professional familiar with, surrogacy is really helpful for that.
So it's good to have someone to talk to go through all of the steps in the process and the psychological counseling. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that and how important it is.
I think it's really important because, there are a lot of things that can come up along the way. And I think it's important for everyone to have thought through all of the worst case scenarios and made sure that they're really on the same page about what they would do. So, for example, if there's a diagnosis in utero, under what circumstances could a termination happen? What happens if you end up with multiples? How is that going to be handled? Are there circumstances which you would reduce the pregnancy? long-term bed rest, what does that look like for a surrogate? How's that going to affect her life? What type of communication is everyone going to have along the way? How about after the baby's born? What are the expectations? Although nothing's legally required, trying to just make sure that everybody's explored all of these different concepts and are on the same page. I just think that's so crucial to make sure that there's a meeting of the minds on all of those important pieces before there's a pregnancy.
And in New York, versus out of state surrogates, what's your thoughts on that for a New York State a couple that wants to use a surrogate?
Do you mean like whether it would be a good idea to use a New York surrogate or?
Well, just a little bit about the process and how different it might be.
Oh, New York versus out of state. So in New York, there's a few things that are somewhat unique, which is one, we have a surrogate's bill of rights in New York, which is provided to the surrogate at the outset, which is really just kind of a 2-page document that summarizes all of her rights under New York state law, which I think is a nice thing because we want surrogates going into this process educated about what their rights are, and we don't want anyone taking advantage of them throughout the process. Also in New York, counsel for both sides is mandated throughout the entire process. So from the start of drafting contracts all the way through the birth, the surrogate has to have access to a New York licensed attorney. Also in New York, insurance is mandated, both medical insurance and life insurance and disability insurance if the surrogate requests it. So I kind of think of New York's law, it's definitely comprehensive, but I kind of think of it as taking all of the best practices in the industry and making them mandatory. So we've seen very positive journeys in New York because they have to follow best practices.
Any other states as comprehensive as New York?
I'm not licensed in every state, but I would say New York is probably the most comprehensive, at least in my experience, and particularly because the other piece in New York is that agencies have to be licensed by the New York State Department of Health. And to my knowledge, that doesn't happen in any other state in the country. So working with a New York surrogate, that the agency has also been carefully vetted by the Department of Health.
And tell us a little bit about the sort of the average cost and what are some of the pieces in the puzzle there that someone can get some ideas of where they're looking towards.
Yeah, so the overall cost, I would say, and this is including, agency fee, surrogate compensation, all of the insurance pieces, lost wages, travel, all of that built in. I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 130 to 150,000 for a surrogacy journey. Unfortunately, it's not inexpensive.
Yeah. No, it certainly is. Is there financing for? I mean, this is a health treatment that there is some health financing out there. Do you know if anyone's financing this journey also?
Yeah, so there are definitely companies that do provide fertility specific loans out there. We've also seen an increase in employer sponsored benefits, whether it's Progeny or Carrot or something along those lines. Also for our gay couples, there's Men Having Babies, which is a great resource. So different things out there. And then, some people will just take out personal loans, home equity lines, things of that nature. We don't personally offer internal financing, but we're always happy to provide, recommendations for different loans and things like that.
We do offer internal financing for the treatments we perform, but not for the surrogate part of it. But it's something that but if they're using a relative, the laws in New York still hold for the health insurance and the disability insurance and life insurance and the attorneys and those sort of things, correct?
They do. The one big difference, though, is that if you're using a relative and you're not compensating your relative, although she still needs all of that insurance, if she already has that insurance, you don't have to reimburse her for it.
Okay.
You also don't have to use an escrow account if you're not compensating. So for a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times when I see someone's sister carry for them, they aren't charging any kind of compensation. And so it brings down the cost for a bunch of other pieces as well.
And they still should see an attorney, a psychologist, someone that has experience in this in order to sort of get the ins and outs of the whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say when you're doing an independent journey, meaning, with a friend or family member outside of an agency, I would say in that circumstance, it's even more important that you have a really experienced attorney because they're going to be connecting you with all of these different pieces.
Let's see. Shay Rains has a question. As long as I have an ovary, am I able to use a surrogate, or would I have to use donor eggs? No. So as long as you have an ovary or two ovaries without a uterus, or a uterus that is severely dysfunctional and not able to carry a child, then we can collect those eggs, make embryos, and then transfer them into a gestational carrier. So what are some of the common barriers that you're seeing, or the challenges that you're seeing with your clients? Anything particular come to mind that would be helpful for those that are listening?
Barriers. Let's see. I mean, since the pandemic, match times have been a bit longer. I know that that's really been problematic for people. We've been really happy to report that we've kept our match times, I think, kind of lower than the industry norm. Right now, we're under 6 months for match times. So that's been nice, but that still feels like a long time. So what we suggest to our families when they come to us early on in the process is that at the same time that they're working with you to create their embryos, that they also sign up with us, so that the time spent creating their embryos, their wait time is running simultaneously. So when they finish with you, they can jump right into the matching process with us.
Yeah, and I generally recommend create embryos, have them banked while you're doing the process, so it kind of speeds things up, because you want to know that you have embryos that you're going to be able to use. But many people will use donor eggs, donor sperm, donor embryos if they're unable to create their own genetic siblings, and then use a gestational carrier. We see a lot of people, I think, that would benefit from using a gestational carrier that just has failed implantation. I think this is what Diana's kind of talking about, infertility, and we often fail to recognize that there's something wrong with the uterus that we don't always understand, that would really be valuable to have more access to gestational carriers.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you a question. We have a
Please.
lot of surrogates who come to us hoping to match with intended parents who have genetically tested embryos. What are your thoughts on, genetic testing of embryos?
Well, it's a challenging one in some ways, because I've seen abnormal embryos become normal babies, and I've seen normal embryos either not implant or miscarry. I've not seen any of our abnormal embryos transferred become an abnormal baby, and the real risk is probably small. But many people sort of are hoping to up their chance for that one or two transfers to succeed. So a chromosomally normal embryo is more likely to implant, although the data hasn't proven that that's how significant it is. And that's our challenge with this. It does add cost, but if you're using a surrogate, it's still probably a smaller part of the total cost. But I would say that if you make more embryos, then the testing can help you sort of find the 25% of the likely normal embryos as the first cohort of transferred embryos. But it just hasn't played out, and I've seen very similar delivery rates in the tested and the untested groups. And so I don't know if you seeing and feeling the same thing.
Yes. So it's interesting that we see so many surrogates come to us wanting genetically tested embryos, and we, kind of try to share this information that we've heard too. So it's interesting to hear you say the same thing.
Yeah, it's we in general, whatever you like, we will do if it is reasonable of what we can do. But when people ask whether they should, I usually say not. And I see many people that have failed genetically normal, chromosomally normal embryos and come to us, and will either do a day 3 embryo, which isn't tested, or they'll go to a cohort of untested. So this is still one of the, but our numbers of cycles that we're doing with genetic testing is on the rise. But it's just, I think people look at medicine as exact, and it's far from exact. It's an art in some ways, and we have to recognize that. And so we're really trying to get as much information out as we can, The challenge is there's so much information and people want to sort of get through the process. And we're doing so much of our work now online where we're not even spending, you don't have enough time to spend with anyone to give them all the information. So that's kind of one of the hardest things to see in the process for sure.
Yeah. Now, do you ever recommend, because I see this a lot, intended parents who created their embryos planning to carry the pregnancy themselves, so they didn't genetically test them. Would you ever recommend thawing them to test them and refreeze them, or do you think the risks are too high for that?
Well, I don't think the risk of thawing, biopsying, and refreezing is that great. But it depends what the reason is for. When you test an embryo, you're not changing the embryo. You're not making a better embryo. If anything, you may actually be reducing the success slightly. And there's some studies that suggest that, but it's still a big, big discussion and argument in our field in all of this. But it's a good question.
Yeah.
Let's see, Meg, GM, do most agencies require day 5 embryos? So do you have any requirements for that?
No, we don't. That does go along, though, with some of the surrogates' preferences. So we talked a little bit about intended parents' preferences. Surrogates get to have preferences, too, about the intended parents that they want to work with. So, that can be things like, I want to work with a married couple, a single intended parent, gay couple, straight couple, whatever it might be, location. But it is also sometimes things like the embryo quality. And not all of our surrogates are even fully educated about all of that, but some have done a lot of research, have asked a lot of questions and know. And so some will ask for, day 5 genetically tested embryos, and some don't. And we've had success with day 3 embryos, which are not tested. So, we definitely don't shut the door to intended parents who are coming in with embryos like that.
And let's see, how old is too old to use your own eggs? I don't know that answer. And that's a very good one, no matter what you're doing in this fertility world, over 45, the probability is very low. It's low at 43, 44 anyway, but depending on an individual's history, their AMH level, their history of pregnancies in the past, you might be able to sort of boost it up a little bit because of that. But I would say over 43, you're really beginning to push it. But you got to look at individuals. And we talked about this earlier, that we always look at averages. Everything we quote is an average, but none of us are average. We're a point on the graph somewhere. And so you don't know if you're in the closer to 0 or closer to 100. None of us know that. We can never predict 100%. I was asked whether or not, we'd put down $1 billion on our bet, what would happen. And almost no one would take the bet, because I've seen 44 and 45-year young women have babies, and plenty of 20 and 30-year-olds not get pregnant in the process. So that's something I think that's real important. Let's see, Ariel Mangan, when do you decide on a patient it might be time for a surrogate? 28, going on 3rd round of FET next week. Well, again, it's either the egg, the sperm, the embryo, or something going on in the implantation environment. And that's going to be an individual decision. But I would say in general, 8 to 10 transfers might even be, the number. But after 5 or 6, the overall probability begins to flatten out. But again, that's that average cohort, not the individual, because I've seen so many people that it took that 8 to 10, even 12 to 14 transfer before they got a baby. And that's kind of an interesting question. But I would say that at 28, don't give up. Look at cnyfertility.com and look at my info on immunology and nutrition. And that's something that I think most people aren't talking about. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you counsel. Do you guys talk about nutrition in the process? Is that something you guys go in the evaluation? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we definitely are encouraging surrogates to have, healthy eating habits. We don't require any strict diets. Sometimes we will have intended parents who feel very strongly about a certain type of diet, whether it's some of them it's vegan or vegetarian or all organic, avoiding certain dyes. We'll have different intended parents who have different criteria, and we're looking for surrogates to match that. But generally, we're asking them to just be reasonable, to follow their OB's recommendations. But do you find that those recommendations that you make for women struggling with their own fertility, that you would make those same recommendations for surrogates?
Yeah, well, I talk a lot about keto diets and carnivore diets, and whether you're vegan, vegetarian, or Mediterranean or carnivorian, nutrition I think is something we overlook in medicine. We talk a lot about a healthy diet, but I don't think we know what it is in our general conversation, in my opinion. But yeah, I've seen some surrogates that have failed. We actually begin to look at immunology. We do a lot of work with Lovenox, aspirin, Prograf, Plaquenil, Neupogen, Humira, IVIG, intralipids. We do a lot of work with integrated medicine, acupuncture, massage, meditation, prayer, chiropractic, and things like that. And then I talk a lot about fasting and keto carnivore. And I've seen big changes when people look at that. Although it's a tough one because it's hard to see so many people that we believe eat unhealthily have babies. And then it's hard to understand why someone that's eating healthy and looks and feels healthy, it's not succeeding. But that's definitely something that we look at. And if someone has either a family member or someone they just really want to use this surrogate, but they've failed, and maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience with surrogates that have gone through multiple failed transfers, and how you guys would handle that on your. We're going to have the discussion of whether or not to find another surrogate, or that we need to do some other testing and treatment, like a laparoscopy, hysteroscopy, or immune treatments and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, these are tough issues for us because when we have a surrogate, especially for example, an experienced surrogate who was successful her first time, now she's working with different intended parents, different embryos, and now we're having repeated failures. It's a tough issue because, most of the time, and, correct me if I'm wrong, it's hard to pinpoint what went wrong. Is it something with the embryos? Is it something with her? Is it, a mismatch between her and the embryos? What's going on there? So those are always tough circumstances. Do you try matching her with yet another family or not? Do you suggest that the intended parents, create, more embryos? Like, where do you go with both of them from there?
And obviously, the intended parents are going to have something to say about that. The practitioners that are dealing with the medical clinical part of it, in that, but it obviously on your side in recruiting surrogates, past success always or likely breeds more likelihood of being chosen.
Yeah, definitely. So we see, a preference from a lot of intended parents to work with someone who's been a surrogate before. I mean, they are harder to come by. Usually their compensation is higher. So it's not perfect for every intended parent, but yeah, I think there's that sense that if someone's been a surrogate successfully in the past, that their body reacts well to the treatment. But also, we've had some success with women who have gone through IVF themselves, whether it's because they're in a lesbian relationship and so they went, IUI or IVF for that reason, or for whatever reason needed themselves and were successful. We've actually had some surrogates who have been successful that way as well, which, although not previous surrogates, show their body's reaction to the medications and the transfer protocol.
And that's a big thing for the surrogates to recognize. In general, there's some medications that are a little bit different than they would if they conceived naturally.
Yeah.
So let's see. Question, Sally Basant: is it a possibility to use a surrogate mother own eggs and your husband's sperm? So is that a traditional surrogacy essentially?
Yeah, if I'm understanding the question, if you're using the surrogate's egg, yes, that would be a traditional surrogacy. So, I see maybe one or two a year in my legal practice, not with the agency. We don't do any of that. But in my law practice, I maybe see one or two of those a year, but they're not very common, but not impossible, just a little more risky on the legal side of things.
And so it's either an insemination or it's going to be an in vitro process also, where they collect the eggs, make the embryos, and put them into the genetic egg donor, essentially. And in a sense, I mean, you the carrier of that baby does have some connections. Have you been? What is the sort of the emotional side of that for the surrogate?
If it's their egg,
Well, even both sides, because women carry. I mean, this is a very emotional. It's a biologic process to have some connection to that baby.
Yeah, so for gestational surrogates where it's not their egg, everybody's different, but we see most of them, most of these women don't struggle substantially after they deliver because they've gone into it with the mindset of the fact that it's not their baby, that, they're nurturing this baby for someone else and they're never going to be keeping this baby. And so and I think that for a lot of them, it's really fulfilling to see the intended parents with their baby at the end. And so we really encourage everyone to spend time together at the hospital after delivery so they can kind of see that transition. Sometimes have their kids come to the hospital so their own children can have that closure of seeing the baby with their parents. But we also encourage them to seek out counseling after the journey's over. And actually, in New York, they're entitled to have counseling for a year after the delivery with the intended parents, covering any cost for that. And we as an agency also, in addition to the individual counseling, have a monthly surrogate support group that our surrogates can go to from the time they start with us and kind of forever on, even after delivery.
And what about the connections afterwards? What are you seeing? Is there a generality you can say, or is it really some sort of a transactional process because it is compensated? And
There are some that feel more transactional, but I think that those are the outlier cases. I think in most cases, there really is a relationship and a bond that's formed throughout that process and some level of relationship that continues. And, for some people, that may be actually visiting and meeting the child as they grow up. And for others, it might just be, exchanging texts and pictures here and there, sending holiday cards. It really varies. But we always tell people at the start on both sides, just stay open-minded about it and let the relationship grow organically, over time and see where it takes you. Don't shut yourself off or, insist that you're going to have a certain relationship.
and maybe you can just tell us a little bit about how did you even get into this, the surrogacy side and creating this as a lawyer?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my mother was actually an adoption attorney. And so I started practicing with her after law school. And the adoption world was kind of slowing down, and the assisted reproduction world was picking up. And so I got involved in egg donation initially. And then got licensed in Vermont, where compensated surrogacy was legal, started my kind of surrogacy career there. And I have to tell you, I fell in love with the process because I just love that it's such a collaborative process where everybody's coming together with this same goal of making someone a parent. And as an attorney, you just get a little snippet of it. You draft a contract, you file a court proceeding, but I really wanted to be involved from day one, where the intended parents decide that they're going to start a surrogacy journey, all the way to taking the baby home from the hospital. So that was my dream, was after we got the law changed in New York, was to open an agency and really kind of be hands-on with all of my clients and a real part of that journey.
That's cool. That's cool. The what do you think? So we donate blood, we donate organs, and yet and I'm going to use this word, forgive me for this, because we sell our eggs, sperm, and uteruses because compensation is in essence a sale of something. And where did we go wrong, do you think, on the reproductive side versus the organ and blood side?
Hmm. That's interesting. I mean, I think of it more that you're not selling or buying those things, but compensating for the time, the energy, the medical risk, those types of things that with the organs and blood, maybe not quite so much. 9 months with all the risks that come with pregnancy is a lot. And I think also there's this huge need for it, right? Like there really is. We've seen a huge boom in New York now that compensated surrogacy is illegal, or is legal, which tells you that it is risky enough and enough of an undertaking that people aren't willing to do it. Most people are not willing to do it for nothing.
Well,
So
and a lot of, and I know in Canada, it's illegal to compensate an egg or a sperm donor, and so ultimately the access to the donors is less, and yet there are women out there that would carry a baby without compensation. Would you say that's obviously 90% compensated, 10% uncompensated in this country? Do you think? Is that
yeah, I mean, I don't know the exact statistics, but based on what I've seen, I would say I think that's probably about right.
But you're right, and I didn't. There was no negative in my connotation to that, but I'd say that it is such a wonderful thing to carry a pregnancy, and there's a lot of risk to all of it. But ultimately, I think that the people are doing it less for the money and more for the joy of helping someone to build a family. That's so important.
Oh, absolutely. I would say that if we saw somebody coming into it just with financial motivation, that would be a huge red flag for us. We hear oftentimes from women who want to become surrogates that they have had someone close to them that experienced infertility, or, they just absolutely loved being pregnant and love being a mom and just want someone else to have that experience too. So they really do come, my experience is from a compassionate place as well. But it doesn't hurt that they can also help their own family with that compensation. They get kind of two positive outcomes from it.
Yeah, yeah, and I would think that whether or not you're seeing that child and your birth mom through the years, or there's some connections, that's still such a special bond in some ways that you can't you can't lose.
Yeah, I hear some great stories about kids who are a little bit older now who have met their surrogate, and what a cool, experience that has been to have that connection, because it's a piece of their puzzle, even though it's not their genetics, it's a part of their creation story.
Is in your birth certificate, though, I imagine in a state where like New York now, and it's the birth certificate has your genetic or intended parent names, not the surrogate.
Yeah, so New York is a little bit quirky with this in that they create an initial birth certificate that lists the surrogate as the parent, but they never give that to anyone. It's kind of internally created, immediately sealed and amended to list the intended parents, and that's the copy that gets mailed out. So no one ever sees that original birth certificate, but New York does it that way for record keeping purposes. I hope that that will change at some point, but that's the reality of it now. In some states, there is an initial birth certificate that's then amended that does get sent out. In some, like in Vermont, the intended parents go on the very first birth certificate. So it varies a little from state to state, depending on their laws and their vital records.
Maybe one day the birth certificate will include the surrogate's name, and maybe one day it'll include the egg and sperm donors' names. If you think about it, because now with genetic testing, you're going to find that out one way or another. And yet, I don't know. I mean, wonder what there's any sort of genetic again, or any molecular label of your surrogate mom within a fetus. There's epigenetics, and we know things that are in our bodies affect our DNA in some ways. So that'd be kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure we'll learn more over the years as this continues to occur.
Let's see, Kawanta Boehner Dodd, 39 years young. Let's see, was super fertility before tubal ligation 14 years ago. Could tubal reversal work? 39, yes, it can. I've even done early 40s also, but it's less likely than when you're 29 and in your mid 30s, but depends on the type of tubal ligation that you've had. But it's a sort of that road of, is it tubal reversal or is it IVF in the process?
Yeah, and just a side note, we do actually have a lot of surrogates who have had tubal ligations, and that is not a disqualifier because we really just need the uterus.
That's right. So whether you've had your tubes tied or removed, what are your main things that you're disqualifying someone for, versus maybe the maybe there is some medical things, but what are the things that you'd say, oh, nope, 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 nope?
So for us, having had more than one miscarriage, having had a stillbirth is a problem. Um, Although, I mean, there are exceptions to certain things, but those are big ones for us. Anything a BMI over 35, we won't necessarily reject, but we'll work with them on, kind of getting that down a little bit, just because they won't have a lot of options for clinics to work with over 35. Over age 45 would be a disqualifier for us as well. So those are kind of the big ones.
And certainly multiple medical problems is another one that I think you got to be, careful for, because pregnancy does increase a lot of those problems for sure.
Yep, or gestational diabetes that
Yep.
require insulin, something like that. Preeclampsia, so things that are going to put this woman in danger, because this whole process is about trying to reduce risk for everyone involved, and we don't want to put a woman in risk for to carry someone else's baby.
What do you see for the future of surrogacy in New York and in America that you see coming or you think should come?
I mean, just generally, I see it becoming more commonplace. So I think we're seeing a trend of people, delaying becoming parents, and so struggling maybe with fertility a little bit more. So I think that we are going to see this as a more common option. I think we're going to see it a lot more in New York now that it's a legal option, as people are becoming more familiar with it. So I think it's going to continue to grow. Hopefully, whatever stigma is out there will decrease over time, and as women who are interested in becoming surrogates, it's more normalized.
So encouraging people to donate sperm, donate eggs, and donate their uterus as a carrier. That would be something that it's really. And what's more important than making babies and building families in this world? Nothing.
Yeah. No,
Nothing.
I mean, we've both dedicated our whole careers to it, right?
That's right. That's right. All right. Let's see. Let's see. Miriam Brown. Thank you for this live. My husband and I got discouraged and started. Started taking the steps for gestational carrier. I've had one miscarriage, one failed implantation, and 2 chemical pregnancies. All embryos were genetically GT. I have one frozen GT embryo, and I'm on the fence if I should try one more time or use a gestational carrier. Let's see. I'm currently 40 years young. Natural killer cells, borderline, and PCOS. Well, a surrogate would be a good option for sure, because it's likely you have a lot of inflammation in your body that is likely rejecting those embryos. And a normal embryo in an unhealthy or inflamed environment can certainly increase the risk of failed pregnancy or miscarriage. That said, things like laparoscopy for endometriosis, for me, it's keto carnivore, and treating with the immune protocols with Lovenox, Prograf, Plaquenil, Neupogen, IVIG, and Humira, maybe some things to look at. And borderline PCOS, which means borderline diabetes, pre-diabetes, which is metabolic syndrome. And in my opinion, it's all related to a plant-based, low animal fat diet. So that should be something to look at. And if you look at cnyfertility.com and look at our website and our CNY family building guide and my keto and carnivore guides, you might find some good help. Did you want to add anything else to that, Casey?
I would just say that intended parents ask us a lot, is one embryo enough to start the surrogacy process? And the answer is yes. However, I do say to intended parents who are starting the process with one that they should already be thinking about the next steps, because the first transfer is not always successful. We hope, and some people have great luck with that. But once you get the ball rolling with the surrogate, you don't want to have a failed transfer and then be processing what's the next step. So already thinking about, will I do another cycle myself? Will I be looking for a donor? And if I'm looking for a donor, maybe I start looking already, so I see what's out there, start getting used to the process of what looking for an egg donor looks like, so that you don't have, a 6-month gap with your surrogate where, she's kind of putting her life on pause. So always kind of hoping. I always say, let's hope for the best, but plan for the worst.
So if I'm going to use a surrogate, and obviously we want it to be successful, but if it's not successful, let's say 3 or 4 transfers, it just doesn't work. And I'm sure you see that, because that just happens in our world. Where's the cost on that type of process?
Yeah. So, with if you have that scenario, typically we're looking at to moving on to another surrogate at that point. So, unfortunately, that's kind of worst case scenario is having to be rematched at that point because you're starting over with a new woman who's going to need to go through the full medical screening, psychological screening, legal process, all of that. So, in a lot of ways, you're starting from scratch on a financial perspective as well. But sometimes it has to happen.
Let's see. And Mara Vadi Holslander asked about financing. Do you have some recommended information on those that are looking to finance surrogacy?
Yeah, so I can share with anybody who wants to email me. I'm sure our contact information somewhere, or we can.
Well, we're going to add it here. Maybe you just tell us the name of and how people can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is NYSurrogacyCenter.com. And on there is our email address. And if you email us, I can send you a whole list of links. You don't have to be our client to have access to that. We're just helpful. We're happy to share the information.
You have a great website, lots of great information, and that I think is always a good place to start to listen, learn, and read. And the websites have so much information; it can be overwhelming. But you got to take your time in this, and you got to get a whole new degree in some way when you have to go through all this. Yeah. All right, let's see. Trisha Jack, I'm 44 years young. W26. With 26 frozen embryos, 12 blasts, balanced translocation, leaning towards surrogate. What are the costs if transfer doesn't work to try again? So you're looking at potentially $150,000 for the whole process and a successful delivery.
Yes. If you have a failed transfer and you're going to try again with the same surrogate, the things to be thinking about are you'll have at the clinic another transfer fee, typically another fertility meds for another cycle, a monitoring clinic. If your surrogate's not local, we're paying some fees to a local clinic to her for ultrasounds and blood work, her travel to the clinic for the transfer. So those are the types of things that add up. But with an agency, at least with our agency, you don't pay us anything additional for another transfer with your surrogate. We're there with you for that whole journey with that surrogate at your initial agency fee price.
I just want to put and it's NY Surrogate?
Surrogacycenter.com. And actually, while you're typing that in, I'll just say too that for anyone who's interested in having a more direct conversation about this, we offer free 30-minute consultations for anyone who's interested in becoming an intended parent. And those are all set up directly with me. So I'll kind of go over more specifics about pricing, hear more about your story and give you my sense of what a journey might look like for you and what to expect. And if you're early on in the process, I'll also take you from, day one all the way through delivery and give you kind of a chronological step-by-step of what to expect with a surrogacy journey.
And it's Casey DiPaola, correct?
Yes.
All right, cool. DiPaola, right?
Yes, you got it. Yep.
I apologize, Casey. And the New York Surrogacy Center.com. I'm sorry. For some reason, our setup today, I didn't put the names there. I'll have to get to Jake and make sure he knows this. Let's see. Maybe donor egg or surrogacy. Please survive tomorrow. 50 years young. Have had twins and a son in a prior marriage. I'm remarried and not sure. Donor eggs at 50 is a certainty in essentially, or donor embryos. And whether or not you can carry baby, if your uterus is otherwise normal, you can, and we've had plenty of success. Surrogacy may be something you'd consider depending on your health and other issues. And do you have a uterus still? If you don't have a uterus, it's a surrogate. And you even if you have regular cycles and you have eggs, we sometimes get some eggs out of 50-year-olds, but I have not seen a pregnancy yet. Not impossible. And we're always open to giving people a chance to do something and try in all of this, for sure. So let's see. Perfect uterus. Yes, tomorrow. So I would say donor eggs and your uterus, and we could certainly help you with that. And CMYfertility.com, we still pride ourselves on if not the most affordable in America, very, very affordable prices compared to the standard prices. The quality is really great all over out there, and you got to find an IVF center that fits for you. But if you go to cmyfertility.com, lots of great information there. And we pride ourselves on integrating a lot of Eastern and Western medicine to help people. Any other thoughts or ideas that we maybe have missed in this, Casey?
The only thing I don't think that I mentioned, which might be helpful for people to know, is I don't think we talked too much about what we do to screen the surrogates. Stop me if I did. Did we say what we do in terms of background checks and all of that on surrogates?
Well, why don't you repeat it again? I don't recall that you did.
Okay, perfect. So before you would ever see a potential profile for a surrogate, we have done some background checks on her. So we do background checks, which are criminal history, credit checks, driving abstract, things of that nature. Also on her partner, we do drug tests, STD tests, pap smears, get OB recommendation letters to act as a surrogate. We obtain all of her medical records from her prior pregnancies and deliveries and review those against the American Society for Reproductive Medicine standards. We review her insurance to see if it will cover her surrogate pregnancy. And we do a virtual home visit with her to get a sense of her living situation and meet the other members of her household. So that's one of the big things that an agency can offer, is not only the hand-holding step-by-step and making sure that things go smoothly, but it's a little bit different than meeting somebody on Facebook and asking them to carry your baby. When you're working with an agency, you really have that security of knowing that she's been thoroughly vetted.
Let's see. Sally Bassat asked about when Sarasota will be open for IVF in July. It's going to start slowly and it's going to build up in August, September, October. So I'm really excited about it, but it's taken a couple of years to get it all going. So we're really excited about it. Let's see. Natasha Lum, 28 years young, severe endometriosis, would like to use my own eggs. Can I carry myself? Let's see. Can I carry? I'll put it over here. Can I carry myself, or should I use a surrogate? Sometimes people with severe endometriosis or severe fibroids may need a surrogate, but I would say that plenty of them will work to use their own uterus first. And if that's not working after several transfers, surrogacy should be considered. And I think, again, younger and younger and younger, I've seen so many people that have failed IVF, yet no one's ever discussed surrogacy. I'm sure you have heard those stories.
Yes.
Why didn't we try it earlier, right?
Yeah. Although I'm hoping now that in New York, now that it's becoming more of a normalized thing, that we'll see more doctors recommending it sooner.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Another question. After being cleared from FDA required blood work and semen analysis, told per the new FDA regulation rule, we have 30 days to freeze the sperm prior to the donor egg retrieval. Otherwise, we need to repeat all the same blood work before we can freeze the sperm. Is this true? I don't know that answer. That's something for the some of my team members who know all these changing rules. But yeah, if you've got it, usually if you're doing it and you're going to get the sperm frozen or the egg or embryos frozen, you need to get them within a certain amount of time. But we can get them later because we have many people that donate embryos that no one's ever been tested. And we don't want to throw those away. We want to be able to use those and help people find the success and make that beautiful baby in their lives. Anything to add to that? Do you have any particular the screening that goes on before that embryo could go into the surrogate?
Yeah, so we defer to the clinics mostly on that, but you mentioned the embryos. Are you seeing an increased use of donated embryos in your practice?
We are, and we're encouraging more and more to donate embryos. I mean, there are I'm going to say there are millions of embryos probably sitting, and eventually there'll be hundreds of millions potentially, because we're not discarding embryos, and people are, they're afraid to throw them away, and then they abandon them, and then what do we do with all these embryos? So that's going to be a big challenge for all of us, but more and more donated embryos, and we're really encouraging people to do that. So important to help. And again, the same side of donating eggs, sperm, embryos, and carry a baby for someone. More of that would be so much nicer.
Yeah, and we're encouraging that too as an option for intended parents to think about, because I know they're sometimes harder to find, but it does reduce the overall cost. And we also usually, when there are embryos being donated, that means people have finished growing their family, which means those embryos have been successful. So, we definitely encourage that as an option, and we hope we'll continue to see more of it in coming years.
Yeah, and what better thing to do than help those beautiful embryos become beautiful human beings? And there's a parent out there for them. And you mentioned the number of adoptions. People giving up their children for adoption has declined.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean,
I think along with, birth rates and teen pregnancies are down as well. So, I think in some states in recent, in the last year or so, we've seen an increase in birth rates. But, overall, we've definitely seen a trend downward in infant adoptions in the U.S.
yeah, and globally, same thing's happening.
Yep. So
let's see, Jade. Let's see. I think it's Gittens. 39 years young, one ruptured fallopian tube and the other blocked and can't be repaired. Yes, you will be able to go through IVF for sure. We can help you with that at cnyfertility.com. Let's see. Egg donation availability at CNY Fertility. Egg, sperm, and embryo donation for sure. And surrogacy also. So the most people go to you first and then the clinic, or the clinic first and then you?
I would say 50-50. And so, if they come to us before they've picked a clinic, we definitely recommend, especially our New York clients, that they come see you, because with so many New York surrogates, it's such a nice fit to have everything be local. It really is great for everybody.
Yeah, and we see people from all over the world, but the local needs are huge, like every place else, right? Let's see. I think Sally asked again about, so we have egg donation, we have sperm donation, we have embryo donation, and we have surrogacy also available at CNY Fertility. Let's see. High mosaic embryos at CNY. Will a surrogate implant a high mosaic embryo? And what is the success rate of a live birth with a healthy baby?
So I can say on the surrogate side of things, a little bit trickier. We would definitely defer to the clinic about whether they would recommend using the particular embryos, but it might take a little bit longer to match with a surrogate.
And we've seen low and high mosaic embryos become normal babies. I haven't seen any abnormal babies out of that, and the delivery rates are actually reasonable. But in general, you're going to get a higher delivery rate with a normal embryo and not a mosaic. So if that's all you're making, I've seen healthy babies out of that. And we're going to just finish up in just a minute. Let's see. Sandy, if I decide to discard my embryos, what do I need to do to make sure they are really gone and not donated? They're your embryos, and we're here to do what you want with your embryos. They're not ours to give away, to do anything with. They sit there until you decide to either have them discarded, donated to science, or donate to another couple or individual. Any other things that you want to mention before we leave tonight, Casey?
Just one quick question for you, actually, because a lot of times when we refer our clients to you, they're also looking for egg donation. How long does it usually take for intended parents to find an egg donor with you? What does that timeline look like?
I would say in the 1 to 3 months, and sometimes it's up to 6 months. But we have over 1,000 eggs on ice right now, and I don't know how many donors that is right now. And we also use eggs from other agencies. But I would say in average 3 months, I tell people, is a good number to find the donor, make the embryos, and in 3 to 6 months, you can get a transfer with either yourself or looking towards a surrogate for sure.
And do you recommend frozen versus fresh for eggs? Do you have a strong preference one way or the other?
I don't. I think they're close enough, but I would say that fresh eggs in general do a little bit better than frozen eggs in making embryos. But the embryos themselves, because we make a lot of embryos and freeze them, and then we do most of our donor egg cycles are frozen embryos before they're transferred. So I would say it doesn't matter that much, but it still is in the works, and we're getting better and better at egg freezing for sure. Let's see. Scenarios will make you need egg donors. Egg donors are needed for women who have diminished ovarian reserve. They're in menopause or premenopause, or they've just have bad quality embryos, which we think may be secondary to bad eggs, but they can equally be bad secondary to bad sperm, for sure. So let's see. One more time on your email, no, your website.
Sure. It's nysurrogacycenter.com. And my email is just my name, Casey, Casey, at nysurrogacycenter.com.
And this was another good point, Amara, is that you can actually ask for the straw and have the straw so you know that they're discarded because you get the straws back from that. But I would say you'd want the straw unsealed because I guess someone could at some other place, but we have very, very, in general, I think, ethical clinicians and practices in this country, but you could ask for that straw for sure. Let's see. I think we got that, and I think we've done well tonight, Casey.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you.
Thank you. And the risk to a high-level mosaic embryo is pretty small, in my opinion. I've never seen an abnormal baby from that, but it's really a pleasure. I look forward to us communicating and sharing more because family building is still the number one need in this world for everyone. So
absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for sharing.
Okay. Have a good night.